The year was 1987, and Jim Bakker stood before millions of television viewers, tears streaming down his face as he confessed to an affair that would topple an empire worth over $100 million. But this wasn't just the fall of one man. It was the first crack in a foundation that had held American society together for over a century. What Bakker didn't know as he sobbed into that television camera was that he had just lit the fuse on a powder keg that would eventually explode the very concept of moral authority in America's heartland. For decades, the Bible Belt, that swath of deeply religious territory stretching from Texas to the Carolinas, had served as America's moral compass. These were the states where church attendance topped 70%, where Sunday blue laws kept businesses closed, and where a preacher's word could make or break a politician's career. The region wielded enormous influence over national politics, social policy, and cultural norms. But by 2023, something had fundamentally shifted. Church attendance in these same states had plummeted to historic lows. Religious leaders found themselves embroiled in scandal after scandal, and the very institutions that once commanded unquestioning respect were hemorrhaging both members and influence. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow-motion collapse decades in the making, involving sex scandals, financial corruption, political hypocrisy, and a generational revolt that would reshape the American landscape forever. This is the story of how the Bible Belt lost its moral authority, and what that means for the future of America itself. To understand the magnitude of this collapse, we first need to appreciate just how powerful the Bible Belt once was. In 1960, over 80% of adults in states like Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee attended church regularly. Preachers like Billy Graham could fill football stadiums and command audiences with presidents. The Southern Baptist Convention, headquartered in Nashville, represented over 16 million members and functioned as a de facto political force. When Baptist leaders spoke, politicians listened. The region's influence extended far beyond its borders. Hollywood studios routinely consulted with religious groups before releasing films. Television networks avoided content that might offend religious sensibilities during primetime. Even presidential candidates made pilgrimages to the Bible Belt, knowing that securing the evangelical vote was essential for electoral success. The National Religious Broadcasters Convention became a mandatory stop for any serious political contender. But cracks were already forming in this seemingly unshakable foundation. The first major fissure appeared in the late 1980s with what became known as the unholy trinity of televangelism scandals. Jim Bakker's PTL ministry imploded first. What started as a single adultery confession quickly unraveled into a web of financial fraud, sexual assault allegations, and lavish spending that shocked even hardened observers. Bakker had used ministry funds to purchase a $2,000 doghouse, gold-plated bathroom fixtures, and an air-conditioned doghouse for his pet. Meanwhile, his wife Tammy Faye's makeup and shopping expenses exceeded the annual income of most American families. Before the dust had settled on the Bakker scandal, Jimmy Swaggart, who had actually helped expose Bakker's corruption, found himself photographed with a prostitute at a seedy motel. Swaggart's tearful confession, "I have sinned against you, my lord," became a cultural punchline, but the damage to evangelical credibility was no laughing matter. Then came Oral Roberts' bizarre claim that God would call him home unless his followers donated $8 million. When the money came in, Roberts lived, but public trust in televangelists died. These weren't isolated incidents involving fringe figures. These men had collectively raised hundreds of millions of dollars, influenced millions of votes, and shaped public policy for decades. Their falls from grace introduced a new level of skepticism toward religious authority that had never existed before in the Bible Belt. The 1990s brought a brief respite as religious leaders attempted to rebuild their credibility. The Promise Keepers movement drew millions of men to stadiums for revival meetings. The Christian Coalition, founded by Pat Robertson, emerged as a formidable political force. For a moment, it seemed like the Bible Belt might recover its lost authority, but this renaissance would prove short-lived. The new millennium ushered in an era of unprecedented scandal that made the 1980s televangelism controversies look quaint by comparison. The Catholic Church's priest abuse scandal, while not limited to the Bible Belt, devastated religious credibility nationwide. But it was the Protestant scandals that cut deepest in the heartland. Ted Haggard, president of the National Association of Evangelicals and a close advisor to President George W. Bush, fell from grace in 2006 when accusations of drug use and same-sex affairs surfaced. Haggard had preached fiery sermons against homosexuality while allegedly engaging in the very behavior he condemned. The hits kept coming with metronomic regularity. Eddie Long, pastor of one of America's largest megachurches, faced multiple accusations of sexual coercion involving young men. Doug Phillips, a leader in the conservative homeschooling movement, resigned after admitting to an inappropriate relationship with a young woman. Mark Driscoll, the brash Seattle pastor who had helped define modern evangelical masculinity, stepped down amid allegations of plagiarism, financial impropriety, and emotional abuse. But perhaps no scandal cut deeper than the 2018 investigation by the Houston Chronicle and San Antonio Express News into the Southern Baptist Convention. Their reporting revealed that over 700 victims had been sexually abused by Southern Baptist ministers, employees, and volunteers over a 20-year period. Many of these cases had been covered up by church leadership, with victims silenced and abusers quietly moved to other positions. The denomination that had once positioned itself as America's moral guardian was revealed to be harboring predators on a massive scale. The statistics tell a stark story of declining influence. In 1972, Southern Baptist membership peaked at over 12 million. By 2021, that number had fallen to under 14 million, despite significant population growth in traditional Bible Belt states. More telling still, the percentage of Americans identifying as evangelical has dropped from 23% in 2006 to just 14% in 2022. Church attendance across the Bible Belt has fallen by an average of 35% over the past 2 decades. But scandals alone don't explain the magnitude of this collapse. Broader cultural and demographic shifts have fundamentally altered the landscape. The Bible Belt has experienced massive demographic changes, with millions of people from other regions moving to cities like Atlanta, Charlotte, Austin, and Nashville. These transplants often bring different religious views or no religious views at all. Meanwhile, younger generations raised in the Bible Belt have proven far less likely to maintain their parents' religious commitments. The rise of the internet and social media has also democratized information in ways that traditional religious authority couldn't control. Young people in small Bible Belt towns can now access perspectives and communities that were previously unavailable. They can fact-check sermons in real time, connect with others who share their doubts, and explore alternatives to the faith of their fathers. The monopoly on moral instruction that churches once enjoyed has been irreversibly broken. Education has played a crucial role as well. Bible Belt states have seen dramatic increases in college attendance and educational attainment over the past 3 decades. Higher education, even at religious institutions, tends to promote critical thinking and exposure to diverse viewpoints. Many young evangelicals have found that their faith couldn't withstand close intellectual scrutiny, leading to what researchers call the evangelical exodus. Political polarization has perhaps inflicted the most damage of all. The cozy relationship between evangelical leadership and the Republican Party, which seemed like a source of strength in the 1980s and 1990s, has become a liability. When prominent evangelical leaders enthusiastically supported Donald Trump, a thrice-married former casino owner who boasted about sexual assault, many rank-and-file believers experienced profound cognitive dissonance. How could the same leaders who had preached about character and moral values suddenly embrace someone who seemed to embody everything they had previously opposed? By the way, I'm curious. Where are you watching from, and what's your profession? Are you experiencing these changes in your own community? Drop a comment and let me know. The 2016 and 2020 elections revealed the extent of evangelical political compromise. Surveys showed that white evangelicals supported Trump at rates of 81% and 84% respectively, higher than any other religious group. But these numbers masked a deeper reality. Millions of evangelicals simply stopped participating in politics altogether, disillusioned by leaders who seemed more interested in power than principles. Exit polling data shows that evangelical voter turnout actually declined in traditional Bible Belt strongholds during the Trump era, even as their support percentages remained high. The response from religious institutions has been mixed and often counterproductive. Some denominations have doubled down on conservative positions, becoming more extreme in their rhetoric and more exclusive in their membership requirements. Others have attempted to modernize by embracing progressive positions on social issues, often alienating their traditional base in the process. Few have found a sustainable middle path. The Southern Baptist Convention's handling of the sexual abuse crisis exemplifies this institutional paralysis. Despite overwhelming evidence of systemic failures, the denomination's response has been characterized by denial, deflection, and damage control rather than meaningful reform. When messengers at the 2022 annual meeting voted to approve reforms, many observers noted that the changes were largely cosmetic, designed more to manage public relations than address underlying problems. Meanwhile, the financial impact has been devastating. Religious giving in Bible Belt states has declined by an average of 40% over the past decade when adjusted for inflation. Many churches that once supported multiple pastors and extensive programs now struggle to maintain basic operations. Seminary enrollment has plummeted, with some institutions facing closure. The infrastructure that supported Bible Belt religious culture for generations is literally crumbling. The collapse hasn't been uniform across the region. Urban areas have seen the steepest declines, while rural communities have maintained higher levels of religious participation. But even in the most conservative areas, the trend lines point downward. Churches that once ran multiple services to accommodate overflow crowds now struggle to fill a single sanctuary. Youth programs that once thrived have been shuttered due to lack of participation. The generational divide is particularly striking. Surveys consistently show that Americans under 30 in Bible Belt states are twice as likely as their grandparents to claim no religious affiliation. They're also far more likely to view religious institutions negatively, with 67% of young adults in the region expressing either distrust or outright hostility toward organized religion. This represents a complete reversal from previous generations, where religious skepticism was virtually unknown in polite society. The implications extend far beyond church walls. Religious institutions in the Bible Belt historically provided crucial social services: food banks, homeless shelters, addiction treatment programs, and disaster relief. As these institutions decline, the social safety net has developed enormous holes. Government agencies and secular nonprofits have struggled to fill the gap, particularly in rural areas where religious organizations were often the only source of social assistance. The political ramifications are equally significant. For decades, religious leaders in the Bible Belt served as crucial intermediaries between politicians and voters, providing endorsements that could make careers and delivering votes in reliable blocks. That system has largely collapsed. Politicians can no longer count on religious institutions to deliver their congregants' votes, and religious endorsements carry less weight than ever before. This power vacuum has been filled by alternative sources of authority: social media influencers, political pundits, and celebrity personalities. But none of these alternatives provide the moral framework that religious institutions once offered. The result has been a kind of ethical free-for-all where moral questions are increasingly answered by tribal loyalty rather than shared principles. The economic implications are only beginning to be understood. Religious tourism, once a major industry in Bible Belt states, has declined sharply. Cities that built their identity around religious heritage, places like Nashville's Protestant Vatican or Charlotte's Billy Graham Memorial, are scrambling to reinvent themselves. Real estate values around prominent churches have stagnated or declined, as the prestige once associated with religious proximity has evaporated. Some observers argue that this collapse represents a healthy correction rather than a tragedy. They point out that the Bible Belt's moral authority was often used to justify discrimination, suppress dissent, and maintain unjust power structures. The region's historic resistance to civil rights, women's equality, and LGBTQ+ acceptance suggests that perhaps some moral authorities deserve to fall. Others worry about what comes next. Religious institutions, whatever their flaws, provided community, meaning, and moral guidance for millions of people. Their decline has left a vacuum that secular institutions have struggled to fill. Rates of depression, suicide, and drug abuse have skyrocketed in many former Bible Belt strongholds, leading some researchers to wonder whether the collapse of religious authority is contributing to broader social breakdown. International observers have watched these developments with fascination and concern. The Bible Belt's influence once extended globally through missionary work, religious broadcasting, and cultural exports. Countries that once looked to American evangelicalism for moral leadership now find themselves questioning whether the American model has anything to offer. This has implications for everything from international development work to diplomatic relationships. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated many of these trends. Churches that once packed their sanctuaries were forced online, where they competed with countless other sources of entertainment and information. Many never recovered their pre-pandemic attendance levels. Surveys suggest that the pandemic gave many churchgoers permission to question habits they had maintained out of social obligation rather than genuine belief. Perhaps most significantly, the pandemic revealed the extent to which Bible Belt religious leaders had lost credibility on issues of science and public health. When prominent pastors promoted conspiracy theories about vaccines, denied the severity of the virus, or claimed that faith could provide protection from disease, they further undermined their authority with educated congregants. The spectacle of religious leaders dying from a disease they claimed couldn't affect the faithful provided a tragic capstone to decades of declining credibility. The response from younger religious leaders has been mixed. Some have embraced what they call deconstruction, a systematic examination and often rejection of traditional evangelical beliefs and practices. Others have attempted to rebuild religious authority on new foundations, emphasizing social justice, environmental stewardship, and intellectual honesty. But these efforts remain small-scale and fragmented compared to the monolithic authority that once characterized the region. If you're finding this deep dive into American religious history fascinating, consider supporting Professor Archive with a super thanks. Your contribution helps us produce more in-depth historical documentaries like this one. The rise of Christian nationalism in some quarters represents perhaps the most troubling response to declining religious authority. Unable to maintain influence through moral persuasion, some religious leaders have embraced political coercion instead. This movement explicitly rejects the separation of church and state that has characterized American democracy, advocating instead for a theocratic system where Christian principles would be legally enforced. While still representing a minority viewpoint, Christian nationalism has gained significant traction in some Bible Belt communities, where traditional religious authority has collapsed. The mainline Protestant denominations that once dominated Bible Belt culture have fared even worse than their evangelical counterparts. Methodists, Presbyterians, and Episcopalians have seen their membership in the region decline by over 60% since 1990. These denominations' attempts to modernize their theology and embrace progressive social positions have largely failed to attract new members while alienating traditional supporters. Many historic mainline churches have been forced to merge, sell their buildings, or close entirely. The African American church tradition in the Bible Belt has shown more resilience but faces its own challenges. While Black churches have maintained higher attendance rates and stronger community connections than their white counterparts, they too have experienced significant membership declines among younger generations. The traditional role of Black churches as centers of political organization and social resistance has been complicated by changing attitudes toward religion among young African Americans. Women have played a crucial role in both sustaining and challenging Bible Belt religious authority. Traditionally, women formed the backbone of church membership and volunteer leadership while being excluded from formal positions of power. As women gained educational and economic opportunities outside the church, many began questioning religious teachings that limited their roles. The complementarian theology that restricts women's leadership has become increasingly difficult to maintain in communities where women serve as doctors, lawyers, executives, and elected officials. The immigration patterns that have transformed Bible Belt demographics have also introduced new religious diversity. The arrival of significant Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and secular populations has challenged the assumed Christian dominance of public life. Cities like Houston now have more mosques than many Middle Eastern cities, while Nashville's Kurdish and Somali populations have established vibrant, non-Christian religious communities. This pluralism has made it increasingly difficult for any single religious tradition to claim moral authority over public life. Technology has fundamentally altered how people consume religious content. The megachurch sermon that once required physical attendance can now be streamed from anywhere in the world. Popular religious podcasters and YouTube personalities often have larger audiences than traditional pastors. This democratization of religious authority has empowered individual believers to craft their own theological positions, while undermining the gatekeeping function that institutional leaders once performed. The environmental crisis has posed particular challenges for Bible Belt religious authority. The region's traditional emphasis on biblical dominion over nature has clashed with growing environmental consciousness among younger believers. When prominent religious leaders dismissed climate change as either fake or irrelevant to Christian faith, they lost credibility with environmentally conscious congregants. Some newer religious movements have attempted to embrace creation care theology, but these efforts have struggled to gain traction in communities where environmental concern is often viewed as politically liberal. The opioid crisis has devastated many Bible Belt communities while exposing the limitations of traditional religious responses to addiction. Churches that once confidently proclaimed that faith could overcome any challenge have found themselves helpless in the face of chemical dependency. The failure of prayer-based addiction treatment programs has led many families to seek secular alternatives, further undermining religious authority in communities where it was once unquestioned. Mental health awareness has similarly challenged traditional religious approaches to psychological problems. The long-standing evangelical practice of treating depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues as spiritual failings has been increasingly rejected by congregants seeking professional help. Churches that once discouraged therapy or psychiatric medication have been forced to adapt or risk losing members to more progressive alternatives. The education sector has become a particular flashpoint in the Bible Belt's authority crisis. As public schools have become more diverse and secular, many religious families have turned to homeschooling or private Christian education. But these alternatives have often failed to prepare students for college or careers in an increasingly secular society. The tension between maintaining religious authority and providing practical education has divided many Bible Belt communities. Higher education has played a complex role in the region's religious transformation. While Bible Belt states have invested heavily in expanding their university systems, these institutions have often become centers of secular thinking that challenge traditional religious authority. Even Christian colleges and universities have struggled to maintain their religious identity while providing rigorous academic programs. Faculty members at religious institutions increasingly report pressure to downplay their faith in order to maintain academic credibility. The role of money in religious institutions has become increasingly problematic as financial transparency has improved. The lavish lifestyles of many religious leaders, once hidden from public view, are now regularly exposed through social media and investigative journalism. The contrast between pastoral wealth and congregational struggle has become particularly stark in economically distressed Bible Belt communities. When a pastor arrives at church in a luxury car while congregants struggle to pay their bills, the moral authority of religious leadership becomes difficult to maintain. The legal system has also played a role in undermining religious authority. High-profile lawsuits against churches and religious leaders have exposed the gap between public religious rhetoric and private behavior. Court documents revealing the extent of institutional cover-ups, financial mismanagement, and personal hypocrisy have become regular features of local news coverage. The same legal protections that once shielded religious institutions from scrutiny have proven inadequate when faced with serious criminal allegations. International missions work, once a source of pride and purpose for Bible Belt churches, has also become controversial. Reports of cultural insensitivity, economic exploitation, and sexual abuse by missionaries have tarnished the reputation of overseas religious work. Younger evangelicals increasingly question whether traditional missionary activities represent cultural imperialism rather than Christian charity. Some denominations have dramatically reduced their international programs rather than face continued criticism. The response to these challenges has varied dramatically across different religious communities. Some have embraced what they call authentic Christianity, arguing that the collapse of institutional authority will allow true faith to flourish without the corrupting influence of power and money. Others have doubled down on traditional approaches, viewing criticism as persecution that validates their beliefs. Still others have attempted to reinvent religious authority for a new generation, emphasizing social justice, environmental stewardship, and intellectual honesty over traditional markers of religious success. The political consequences of this collapse continue to unfold. Politicians who once courted religious endorsements now often find them more liability than asset. The evangelical vote that once moved as a unified bloc has fractured into competing factions with different priorities and loyalties. Some religious leaders have attempted to maintain political influence by embracing increasingly extreme positions, but this strategy has often backfired by further alienating moderate believers. The future of Bible Belt religious authority remains uncertain. Demographic trends suggest continued decline, as younger generations show little interest in traditional religious institutions. Climate change, urbanization, and technological advancement are likely to further erode the cultural foundations that once supported religious authority. Yet pockets of traditional religious life persist, particularly in rural areas and among certain ethnic communities. Some observers predict a complete collapse of organized religion in the Bible Belt within the next generation. Others anticipate a smaller but more committed religious community emerging from the current crisis. Still, others expect new forms of spiritual authority to develop that better serve contemporary needs and values. What seems certain is that the monolithic religious authority that once characterized the region is gone forever. The story of the Bible Belt's moral collapse serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and institutional arrogance. It also raises profound questions about the role of religion in democratic society and the sources of moral guidance in an increasingly secular world. Whether this collapse represents liberation from oppressive authority or the loss of crucial moral foundations remains a matter of intense debate. As we watch this transformation continue to unfold, one thing becomes clear. The America that emerges from this crisis will be fundamentally different from the one that preceded it. The Bible Belt's moral authority was never just about religion. It was about power, identity, and the right to define what it means to be American. As that authority crumbles, we're all left to grapple with what comes next in a nation searching for new sources of meaning and moral guidance. The reverberations of this collapse extend far beyond the borders of traditional Bible Belt states, influencing national politics, cultural norms, and social institutions across the country. We're living through a historic transformation whose full implications won't be understood for decades to come. What we can say with certainty is that the era of unquestioned religious authority in America's heartland has come to an end, replaced by something messier, more diverse, and fundamentally less certain. Thanks for joining us on Professor Archive for this deep exploration of American religious transformation. If you found this analysis valuable, please like the video and consider subscribing for more historical documentaries that examine the forces shaping our world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking critically about the world around you.